Welcome, ladies and gents, to the Grim and Bloody Podcast. This show is a presentation of horror, thriller, and suspense, and is intended for a mature audience. Join us at your own risk.
Well, thank you for joining the Grim and Bloody Podcast on this Thursday, April 28th. With us today is Julian David Stone, author of It's Alive, which is the recount of the summer of 1931 from Junior Laemmle, Universal Studios, who had just put together Dracula and are in the final days before Frankenstein was going to begin filming. It's a fascinating read, and if you are like me and you have no idea what happened during that time, you just know Frankenstein was a good movie, you're going to want to pick up this book that is hitting bookstores and on Amazon May 17th. But before further ado, let me go ahead and introduce my cohorts. Kevin Nicholson, writer, Horror Newsnet, writer, We Belong Dead magazine. How you doing, Kevin?
I'm doing great. Looking forward to this interview because I grew up watching this, watching these Universal films, so I know a little bit about it.
Excellent. Yeah, we had plenty of time to. We had an advanced screening copy, so it was a fascinating read. I'm looking forward to talking about it. Joe Flynn, how you doing, Joe?
I'm doing great. Yes, like Kevin, most of us grew up watching these fantastic classics from Universal back in the good old days.
And Al Omega, host, Creature Feature Show. Welcome, Al.
Thank you.
And Julian David Stone, thank you very much for coming on, sir. And I want to go ahead and thank your publishing house for providing us copies and plenty of time to get our heads around this book, because
Smith Publicity.
Yes. Thank you very much.
Outstanding.
Publicity. Thank you. For gents like me, who probably not familiar with the story behind what happened regarding the production of Frankenstein, Boris Karloff, how you got started, Bela Lugosi, Universal Studios when they were kind of in the throes of some pretty big change. This whole book, if you had no idea what happened after you just picked up this book, because you're like, oh yeah, I heard it on the Grim and Bloody Podcast. Let me go ahead and check out this book. This story is fascinating, and one of the things that hit me was just how much information, both external and internal, you had, Julian. It almost felt like fiction because you were kind of like the ever-present, omnipotent, eye. And in story, sometimes you have the advantage of both being there in the room and also inside the character's head. So this didn't read kind of like a documentary or kind of like a journalistic take. This read like you were there front and center, and you knew Bela Lugosi and Boris Karloff and what Junior and his father were going through. So I was reading this like it was almost fiction, even though it was real and it happened. But it was still an amazing ride, and it was obviously a critical junction for these three main gentlemen. Maybe did you want to kind of explain a little bit of how did you achieve this kind of narrative, and
Sure.
What was your inspiration behind it to begin?
Sure. Well, first of all, it's great to be on with you guys. Thanks for having me on. It's historical fiction. It's all based on fact, but it is a novel. It is a work of fiction, which allowed me, like you said, to sort of get in their heads. And I just, I grew up sort of my journey to reading this. I grew up like a lot of people, when I was very young, I was a fan of the movies, of Frankenstein and Dracula and all the horror films. And I made the Aurora model kits and the whole bit. And then I kind of drifted away from it. And then I rediscovered them as an adult, and I saw them as, very differently, seeing that these were really interesting, complex movies, particularly the early ones. And that's when I started to look into the history of them. And I really got into it, and I started reading about them. And when I discovered the character of Junior Laemmle, being someone who was 21 years old and running Universal Studios, that's when I started to really think, okay, I need to write a novel about this. And eventually, as you were mentioned, I incorporated Boris Karloff and Bela Lugosi into it, because this movie was the moment that changed all three of their lives. And it's such a famous film, and all of the decisions that were made by these three people during this period of time changed all of their lives. And it also changed, frankly, Hollywood in a lot of ways, because the horror genre was born really with the beginning of the Universal movie cycle. And that was the story that I wanted to tell.
I wanted to ask, though, or ask you about, you seem to go even further into the kind of the psyches of the players involved here.
Right.
And I thought that was, really just incredibly, detailed, because you get the struggling, the struggling of Karloff and his, basically, he is unsure of himself. He is, am I going to get this, get this gig? Am I not going to get this? Am I going to have to go back? And with Lugosi, he is this, his thing is ego. As a star, did you have to do a lot of research even to get that information?
Oh, absolutely. I mean, research is one of my favorite things. And this is something I'd like to say, that I don't feel comfortable writing, particularly with historical fiction, a book about another time until I sort of describe it as I can wear the era, meaning I feel comfortable in the era. And it took me a long time to get there. And I read everything I could. And what I particularly like is I like to read contemporaneous stuff, meaning I read every magazine I could find about the movie business from 1931. Of course you read some of the histories written later, but the best is to read what people are saying in the moment. It's so much more interesting because, history is not, we look back at it like, oh, Karloff was Frankenstein. Well, as my story says, that wasn't necessarily the story. It could have been somebody else, and it's fascinating when you read the accounts at the time, and my book opens, even though it's historical fiction, there's 3 pages in a row of newspaper, like lines from newspapers during 1931. And every one of those is real, where you see first it's Bela Lugosi, then Bela Lugosi's not going to do it. Then there's a letter that James Whale wrote to Colin Clive, who plays, Dr. Frankenstein, saying, and this is just weeks before the film starts shooting, that the part of the monster is going to be played by Bela Lugosi or Boris Karloff. So you can see, in the true history of it, it was very fluid, as opposed to now, everybody just thinks for the last 90 years, Karloff is Frankenstein, and it almost wasn't that way. And that's the story I wanted to tell.
And it's a great story in that, but like in your book, before we get into this too much, perhaps you could set the stage for, a lot of us who weren't there at the time and can't wear the era. What was going on? I mean, talkies were just coming in, and tell us some more about that.
Sure. So that's something that, and it's interesting, there is a movie coming out, I believe this December, that's going to be dealing very much, with the sound era coming in. And Singing in the Rain, if everybody knows that, is a great film if you want to see a film from years ago that deals with it. But basically, up until 1927, sound really was, there had been little experiments here and there, but obviously The Jazz Singer is the famous film that changed it. And overnight, and to give you an idea of how rapidly it happened, up until 1927, there were no sound films being made. By 1930, the studios had completely stopped making silents. Nobody was making them. In a matter of a couple of years, the silent movie died and sound came in, and careers ended. I mean, people who were huge stars suddenly found themselves gone. and new people. They brought people in from Broadway who were used to speaking, so it was a huge change in the business. And the other thing also that is fascinating about the era is nobody really knew, like, sound came in, but nobody really knew what is a sound film. When you look at films from 1928, 1929, they're still experimenting. Like, do people necessarily just want sound effects? What is a sound film going to be? Do they want dialogue too? Do they want music? It's not until about 1932 and 1933 that if you look at the films from that year, you go, okay, they look old, but the relationship of sound to picture is what I'm used to. So you're also right in that era where people are just starting to figure out what exactly a sound movie is. And that's one of the things that enhanced, these films, was that, for lack of a better example, the creaking door. There's one, I think in Dracula has some great ones. Well, a couple of years before that, you couldn't have done that. It's just the right time for these films, and that's why they kind of exploded, because sound was coming in and it really enhanced the experience, in particular to these films. Imagine the creation scene from Frankenstein without the sound of the electricity, the explosion of the circuit breakers and the storm and all of that. It would have been dramatic silent, but it wouldn't have been quite the same.
I don't have to imagine growing up with movies like this. Back in the old days, for our younger listeners, if you were lucky, you knew somebody who had a projector, and they might have a reel or two of cartoons and movies like this. And I can remember one rainy afternoon down at the community center at our local park, they were showing Frankenstein for the kids, and it was probably an 8-minute version of Frankenstein.
Right.
Actually, I remember it was a Bride of Frankenstein. And it was quite dramatic, especially with the weather effects outside. But movies in general were actually pretty new at this point. As I understand, the very early silent films was just a train coming at people, and people actually screamed and moved out of the way because this was such a new effect. Adding sound must have been just as powerful as having that visual effect for the first time for these people. And I imagine the technology jumped.
Yeah, no, in fact, what people have sort of forgotten with the Jazz Singer, which was the film that's sort of credited with, the sound revolution, that it wasn't so much the musical numbers in that film, because it was the Jazz Singer only had a few sequences with sound. But what was unusual was there had been a few early experiments. There were a series of shorts that were made where performers would sing and they had sound. But in the Jazz Singer, there was actually a couple of sequences where people just talked to each other. And that was actually the thing that really kind of launched the revolution, because people hadn't really seen that before. It wasn't just, there had been some early experiments, like I said, with sound going with performance, but just people talking was like, oh my God, we can do this now in a film. And that's really what set it off.
That's very fascinating. My question for you, Julian, would be, what was the relationship between Karloff and Lugosi at this time?
Well, at the time of this, they had not met each other. I do have some fun scenes where they encounter each other in my story. They're historical fiction. They're based on some of their later encounters, but they didn't meet, as my understanding of it is, until after Frankenstein came out and made Karloff famous. And obviously Lugosi was already famous from Dracula. And there's a wonderful photo session that was done in early 1931 where the two of them are sort of brought together, and they're both wearing tuxedos, and it's sort of, the two titans of horror. And you can find them on the internet. They're wonderful. They're both in tuxedos, and they're sort of clinking mugs of beer together, and they're standing. And so, at that point, it was certainly portrayed to the press as very friendly. Eventually they went on, Universal put them together in over 9 different movies, and that's a whole other story. But, they had apparently a complicated relationship over the years. For the most part, they seem to have spoken well of each other, but where their careers went after this movie is very different, was quite different. Karloff became a star and never stopped being a star. And when Frankenstein was made, Lugosi had just become a star from Dracula, but over the next few years, his star started to wane. And for the most part, throughout his life, he struggled on and off with financial problems and other things. So that's why I was so intrigued by this moment, because like I said, it was their lives were never the same after this movie.
Now, I wanted to touch on a little bit of Universal Studios during this time, and maybe your thoughts on the change between Carl and his son, Junior Laemmle, right?
Lemley.
Lemley. I'm going to tear that name up. It's a fascinating period when the father has a very specific kind of vision for Universal Studios, and it was very successful. By this time, when we're jumping into the story, Universal Studios is a powerhouse in Hollywood, right? They have a sprawling, and your description of Universal Studios, by the way, in this time period was amazing. It couldn't have been any better. Full visuals, you get the look and the feel. You also get a feel that this family is well-to-do. They are definitely living the life, especially Junior. I was very envious of him. I'm like, this guy, his mother, he has it all here. I hope I hope he falls and breaks a leg so I can actually root for him, because he already has everything. But it's a studio that is doing very well for itself. And Junior comes in and, without giving too much, although it is a historical fiction, he's looking looking forward very much to a promotion. His father is arriving. He's looking forward to a promotion. It doesn't happen. He's thrown off his guard, and things kind of just snowball from there. But talk about the big change, at least on the macro level, from Junior's vision of Universal Studios to this change we see Carl put it through, to where they're putting out horror, and to this day they're still known for these classic monsters. And if you ask anybody, it's like, what do you know Universal Studios for? It's for these classic monsters that his son put through, even though that's not how Universal Studios got established.
Right, absolutely. When his father was much more, as you would expect, as is usually a more pragmatic businessman, and you never really, Carl Sr. is fascinating. He's so different than the other sort of legendary studio founders from the era, because one of the things about Carl Sr. was he never struggled. From the moment he was born, he was kind of a middle-class guy, and he left Europe, he came to America and succeeded. He didn't decide to go into the film business until he was in his 40s, and he had a very comfortable middle-class life, which is very different than all the other studio heads of the era, who started the other famous studios. They were all sort of at the bottom economically. So that was one of the things that was always fascinating to me about him. And Universal, almost from the beginning, he started first with movie theaters, then distributing films, then making his own. And then he had the vision in 1915 to come out to California, and he started Universal Studios, on the same spot that it's on to this day. And over the next, 15 years, it thrived. But the one thing about they made some big budget films, but by the late 30s, they were kind of a mini major. There were 4 or 5 other studios. And again, it was a thriving business. I don't want to make it sound like it wasn't, but they weren't in the same league as MGM and Paramount and RKO. They just weren't in that league. And when Junior took over on his father put him in charge of the studio on his 21st birthday in 1929, basically Junior wanted to change that. And he started making less films because Universal would make a lot of cheap films. He decided to make fewer films and a lot bigger budgets. And kind of from the beginning, it was pretty successful. I think one of you mentioned when we were talking earlier, he made All Quiet on the Western Front. which was a hugely successful film. It won Best Picture, and they spent a lot of money, but it was a monster hit. So he was kind of successful out of the gate, but they were definitely taking bigger risks, because when you invest more in a film, that means, there's a lot more at stake on it. And the horror films were the same way. Nobody in Hollywood wanted to make these films, and Junior saw something in them, thankfully for us, and he was very passionate about it. And there's a great interview with his father where, he makes it very clear, the father, that he didn't want to make the films and that Junior fought to make them, and Junior was right. And when they became big hits. So that was kind of the difference between them. Junior wanted to make fewer films, bigger budgets, and he wanted to make films that were a little bit more on the edge, like Dracula and Frankenstein.
Now you mentioned it somewhat in the book when you talk about Junior's anxiety attacks,
Right.
and his health. Did he resent his father in some way? Because his father does, come off as kind of a bastard towards his, towards his son, or really harsh, towards his son. And I'm wondering, was that something that you touched, or you think as well, or you touched on, or was he just tired of living in Dad's shadow?
I didn't, that's interesting. I didn't try to write him as being a bastard. He was, he was definitely tough. This was a business that he started, and nobody does, what he did. I mean, the backstory on Carl Laemmle Sr. is, just crazy. Like I said, and it's so weird because he was so middle class and successful when he jumped into the business, and then he fought all kinds of battles and eventually obviously came out quite well. I think he was worried by what Junior was doing because of the risks and what it could do to the studio, and it was such a different direction than what he was doing, what he had done when he was running it. And they had a complicated relationship like anybody has, father and son. But they definitely loved each other, but they definitely went through periods where the relationship was strained. And as a writer, that was another thing that sort of attracted me to the studio, or to the story, because what is Frankenstein on some level but a father and son story? It's about a creator who's disappointed with his creation. And what was the relationship between Carl Sr. and Carl Jr.? It was the father who wasn't happy with what his son was doing, and that kind of parallel is always something fun to write as a writer.
I'll take back the word bastard. That's a really harsh word, ladies and gentlemen. I take that back. But it seems like a hard man.
Yeah, well, no, but that's what's so fascinating, because his reputation was not that. He was known to everybody as Uncle Carl. He was sort of this beloved figure. And if you look at footage of him, let's not even talk about Junior. The battles that he fought 15 to 20 years before my story even takes place, like, I can't jibe it with the man when you see photos of him and you read about him. He just seems like this beloved Uncle Carl character. And he basically started in 1912 with 5 or 6 partners, and over a period of 3 or 4 years bought each guy out. And I mean, it was just kind of just crazy until he was the sole guy in charge of Universal, and then he launched the studio. And it's hard when you look at him. The other studio guys, you just look at him and go, okay, these guys look like bastards. They look like tough sons of bitches. He just looks like this beloved guy. But like you said, he clearly something was there, because he fought a lot of battles that even some of these other guys didn't do. He took on Edison, all kinds of stuff. So yeah, he was a tough guy. I mean, it may not be the way I necessarily wanted to portray him, but you're probably onto something with that description when you really look at what he was able to achieve. He had to do something, he had to be pretty tough to do all that he did.
Yeah, and I can't take that back, Kevin. It's already trending on Twitter. Kevin Nicholson calls Carl Laemmle a bastard. So it's already out.
Go figure.
That's
These things,
right.
they move fast, man. They move fast.
And
these were
these
hard times. I mean, these were people that were pioneers of what they were doing.
Yeah.
They were fighting an uphill battle. You talk about somebody coming from a middle-class background. We've talked to people, and we have talked about producers who, they own their home. Then they make a production and they get a loan against their home. And then money to pay off the home. And they come back at the next production and they get a loan against the home again. And these people at that time, there weren't a lot of safeties involved in society.
Yeah.
Social Security didn't exist. You could be pauperized, and that was just the end of you. So that's why so many, especially as you point out, Mr. Lemley comes from this middle class background, but the other gentlemen didn't. They were scrappy little monsters, and I bet they were nipping at his heels the whole time. And he was very, I'm sure, concerned about that. And I love how you say this is, a father and son movie. I think it's just about, the joke about the bodybuilding contest that went wrong. So
that's funny.
Thank you. But seriously, I mean, this was, I'm sure, intensely personal for these people. I know in my productions they are. And like I said, to have other people nipping at your heel, I can really identify with that.
Mm-hmm. No, I mean, that's the film business, then and now.
I like how you also talk about other characters. I'm very happy that you brought into the story Sydney Fox, who is gorgeous.
Yeah.
A gorgeous starlet back in the day. And her relationship with Junior really takes a hit because of his determination to get Frankenstein made. You can tell that there is from your writing that there is a stress on the relationship. And talk about that for a little bit if you can.
Yeah, there was a relationship between Junior Laemmle and Sydney Fox. Obviously a lot of the stuff was created for the sake of the novel. Sure. There, wasn't documented, and she had an interesting career. She had about a 3 or 4 year run, most of it at Universal, and then after Universal let her go, she made a couple other films, but she faded kind of into obscurity, and I think she died in the late 30s or early 40s. But yeah, I agree with you. Very pretty. Was a very competent actress. She just never quite, had much of her career beyond these first few years. And in terms of the monster world, she's in, Murders in the Rue Morgue, so she's known for working with Lugosi. But she made other films, light comedies and that sort of thing. And in terms of their relationship, that is kind of my extrapolation. Is as anybody who's worked in this business, it can affect your relationships, because it's definitely in a job that is not an 8-hour day. So and putting somebody in Junior's position of running a studio, it would definitely be stressing your relationship. So I incorporated that to add some conflict and to just make it fun.
Think about that, trying to run a studio back then where no internet, no cell phone. You want to reach someone, you'd call a secretary.
Yeah.
And they might not be in the office. The secretary might have to hunt them down, and then you'd take a message, and then they'd have to get back to you, and they have to find wherever the heck you've gone off to. Right. Because you can't sit there in the office. You've got to either be out there on the lot, or you're out talking to someone, or on a location. And if you're on a location, then you're probably unavailable just in general, and no sleeping in. Lots of phone calls in the middle of the night.
Yeah.
Very stressful on any relationship.
Yeah, definitely.
I do have a question, really, and this is going out for anyone who's a book lover. What would you like the people who love to read books take away from your book?
That's a great question. I want them to enjoy the excitement of the era, like you were sort of bringing up, that it's this, this is when the movies are, the 30s were probably the period when the movies were the most you know, it's still kind of the dominant art form, but at that time it was really the dominant art form. And it was already massively successful in the 20s, but in the 30s with the Depression, it kind of became everything. And this is right, like we said, at that turn to sound. So it's a really exciting time. And I want people to enjoy that. Just it's a fun read of the era, but it's also about the birth of a type of film that is very beloved to this day. Like you said, that 90 years later, that's what Universal is known for. You know, Universal is building a Universal Monsterland in Florida at their theme park. These films are 90 years old. That's kind of amazing that they have this staying power all these years later. So I want people to enjoy sort of seeing how they were born.
Now, I have a question. Go ahead.
Go ahead, Anthony. No, you go ahead, Anthony.
Mine was kind of just like a hypothetical. Did you have a more specific one?
No.
Okay. Julian, seeing how Universal Studios created some of the most iconic monsters in classic narratives, what would you think Junior's reaction to their recent attempt to create the Dark Universe be taken?
You know, it's so fascinating because the Universal cycle that starts with Dracula and really ends with The Creature Walks Among Us, the films are so good and there's such a connective tissue in a weird way, even though it's over 25 years between them. And boy, did they, you know, that first Mummy with Tom Cruise, what a mess. And it just, you can't capture, there was something magical, particularly in the first 5 movies that were made when Junior was there. It was this wonderful mix, really, of the two people. You know, I sort of, you have Junior, who was the person who put the package together, but the two people of the films that I sort of, in my mind, that I credit with sort of shaping them in terms of their feel and their look are James Whale and Karl Freund, who shot Dracula and directed The Mummy, and then Whale obviously directed the two Frankensteins and The Invisible Man. It's this wonderful combination of German expressionism, but because you have Whale's sensibility, you have this English comic sensibility, and the two are melded together, so you don't end up with something as amazing as it is. Nosferatu or Cabinet of Dr. Caligari, they're a little draining to watch. They're amazing and I love them, but they're kind of one note and dark. And what Whale brought to it is that he has that creepy, wonderful look and the black and white and these sort of nondescript sort of European locations, but he brings this great comic sensibility that just melds so well. So, you can't do that again. Like, I know they had this vision with it starting with the Tom Cruise Mummy, but I don't know how you could do that again. It's like, and clearly they're struggling with it because, I don't even know. I think they basically gave it up. And then the only one that's been successful was that Invisible Man movie, but that was done by their sort of low-end Blumhouse thing. So I honestly don't, I think it's kind of dead. You can't put, it was lightning in a bottle,
It certainly was the wrong turn, I think. And it's funny because if you look back, they had Bela Lugosi, who was already an established star. And Junior turned to Boris Karloff, who, although he was in theater, he was a relative unknown. You think putting someone with a name would have attracted, or kind of jump-started things. And I mean, going with Tom Cruise is not a bad idea. The guy is a money machine, right? He's box office, and he's been in a couple horror movies, maybe not thorough horror, but I'm thinking of Interview with a Vampire. I know it's derided, but he has the chops. He has enough range to pull it off. But he just looked lost in that movie. It was, without straying too far. I was kind of hoping for the Dark Universe because, this would have been kind of like my opportunity to kind of, maybe experience a new wave of the classic monsters, And when it fell apart, it was disappointing because you have the Marvel universe that's coming around. We need that horror universe. We need our own little universe. So I was looking forward to kind of like a reinvigorated classic monsters, maybe with fresh faces and visionaries behind it. So yeah, it was disappointing, but we still have these classic stories to revisit when we want to, and your novel definitely brings to life a lot of the behind the scenes stuff, both real and filled in. I think it was just kind of like a wonderful story altogether.
Well, thank you. It was an absolute blast to write. It's one of those things that people often say that writers sort of write the story that they want to see. And to some extent it was that, because I just love these movies so much, and putting the history of the time in there, and I love Karloff and I love Lugosi, and it was just an absolute joy to write.
I thought what was fascinating to me was your incorporation of some of the incidental, or some of the smaller characters into this book. As we mentioned, Sidney Fox. You have bits with Luella Parsons, who had to be kind of like the wonderfully annoying gadfly that nobody wanted to, everybody wanted to see when it was promoting something, but as soon as you were not promoting something, go away. I don't want to. And you have a card game.
Yeah.
With Adolf Zucker, with Roy Cohn, with and you're going. You're thinking these are all the major players, everything that is Hollywood film industry. You even describe it as such. Everything that's Hollywood film industry is in this one room.
Yeah, and that's based on a real card game. Samuel Goldwyn had a legendary card game, with studio heads and stuff. And that was another thing, when you read about that and you're like, okay, I want to write that. I'm going to put a scene there.
Sure.
I'm going to have your, get to go to the legendary card game, and
sure.
That's part of the fun of it. That these guys enjoyed the position they had in life, like you were saying, and so I wanted to show that some of the fun that they did have.
Right.
Go ahead, Al.
I was going to say, talking about Tom Cruise there in the Dark Universe, I too was really looking forward to the Dark Universe, because this is getting to be a retelling of the stories, and you'd have all the special effects and so forth. But really, I think the big problem they had with Tom Cruise is, as you said, he was a real money maker. He's a money machine. And that's how they did their casting, rather than saying who the right guy for it was.
Good point. Yeah.
I think maybe Brendan Fraser might have done a better job.
Can I interject just one thing about talking about the Mummy? Tom Cruise is not the problem with the Mummy.
Okay.
In reality, the problem with the Mummy, especially having it as the anchor for the monster universe, is that Universal had already redone the Mummy in 1999 with Brendan Fraser.
True.
And dumbed it down to play more like Indiana Jones than a terrifying mummy. So my argument is that you started off with the wrong property if you want to incorporate have something that has a terrifying look to it and so forth. Plus the script was, as Anthony I think even mentioned, the script was all over the place.
The whole thing was just a mess. I think Alex Kurtzman came out and said this is the worst thing I ever put out.
Yes.
Yeah.
Yep.
I think Tom Cruise is like the least of the problems. In fact, he's one of the few little bits that I enjoy about it, is that kind of star charisma that he has. But even he couldn't save this.
No, I couldn't save the movie.
No, but it's interesting to bring all that up, because that is one of the problems. The aspects of the film industry. I've got a contract. I've got to use this guy over here or lose him, and I got to put him in a movie, and I want to do this movie first. But I've got people that are more interested in backing a different movie that I don't want to do just yet. It'll be better if I put it off, but I can't because I won't get the funding otherwise. Such a mishmash, a mind navigate to get everything up the way you want it. Sometimes it's amazing that any of them manage to put out a movie, especially when you have, like this, they're planning a string of movies at all, because there's so many of these little problems that step in. So it's like politics practically. So
yeah, it's the film business is a strange thing, and it's very hard. Yeah, I'd be fascinated to know what, obviously I knew they were trying to relaunch it as a cycle, but I don't know, like, let's say that same movie had been successful. I'm very curious what they were trying to do, I don't know, the monsters aren't really superheroes that are pushing the story forward, it's usually the other characters that are sort of reacting to them. And I don't know, the Universal cycle worked because the initial films, they weren't intentionally trying to link them. They just were like, oh, this succeeded, let's do another one. And the same people worked on them, and Whale, and like I said, the work of both James Whale and Carl Freund made them kind of connect. It was only later that they started putting them together. So they didn't start it with the intention of doing a cycle, which is kind of why it probably worked, where Universal tried this time to make it into a cohesive thing, and it just didn't work. The Marvel universe probably works because they were already connected in the comic books. They didn't invent putting these characters to get together. The Avengers had been a comic book for what, 40, 50 years. So, that sort of helps, where the Universal thing, was different what they were trying to do. Yeah, I'd be fascinated to know where it would have gone if the first one had been successful,
I do like the fact that you bring up the monster mashes very very briefly. Early Kenton, fan right here. House of Frankenstein, House of Dracula. That
it's one of the things that I love about what the cycle of the movies, because you start with sort of the first 5 or 6 that are made when Junior's there, and then you have the sequels, and then you have the mashups, and then you have the comedies, with Abbott and Costello. And then just when the cycle looks like it's done, they come back with 3 Creature from the Black Lagoon movies in a weird way that kind of go through the cycle quickly. They have the first one, then they have a sequel, and then the third one, you might argue, is a comedy, maybe not intentionally, but so it's just a wonderful cycle of movies, how they just kept using these characters and found a new way to reinvent them, or to put them in new situations that were fun.
What's wrong with Jeff Morrow's acting in this in The Creature Walks Among Us? Come on.
Oh, I love it. Don't get me wrong. It still feels like a Universal monster movie,
I love it too.
It's still there. The first one, The Creature from the Black Lagoon, is, certainly one of the 2 or 3 best of the whole Universal cycle. It's a terrific film.
Sure.
I don't know. I think advantages they had was, maybe the purists would disagree, but I think at some point it really inflamed the kids' imagination when they started doing Frankenstein versus the Wolfman, bringing these characters together. Because people do like a cohesive universe. Mm-hmm. They want it all to go together. They want to know who's stronger. Kids always want to know who the stronger one is.
Well,
and so forth.
From a marketing standpoint, it's like, what's the next step? You've done Frankenstein, you've done the sequels. Okay, now let's put them with the Wolfman. That's kind of just the way you sort of raise the stakes,
Yeah, I agree wholeheartedly. But before we wrap, Julian, can you tell us a couple things? One, what is it you're working on next? And 2, where can our followers find you on the interwebs?
Sure. So I'm about halfway through my next novel, which has to do with the space race, competing with the Russians in the 60s to land the first man on the moon.
Oh, nice.
Yeah, I'm as passionate and knowledgeable about the space program, if not more, than I am about the Universal Monster Universe. So that's something that I'm kind of immersed in at the moment and very excited about. And you can find me at juliandavidstone.com. There's lots of stuff there about my book, about the monsters, and about my other projects, that I've done over the years. And yeah, that's a great place to check me out, juliandavidstone.com. And I'm obviously on Facebook also, as Julian David Stone, and I'm pretty active on there, especially now as I'm getting, towards the release of the book in a few weeks.
Well, you mentioned about the space race, the space program, and so forth. We had a guest on not long ago, Tom Jennings, the documentary filmmaker, who did a documentary on the Challenger disaster.
Oh wow!
And he said one of the keys that why he was so interested in doing the documentary is he literally found hours and hours and hours of footage surrounding the Challenger launch and so forth that was literally going to, not being used. And so he was able to, call from that. I'm fascinated with space as well, and I sure like to have you back when you're ready to talk about the space race.
Oh, I'd love to. Anytime. Yeah. It would be great. Love to do that.
Fantastic.
And that'll be the next Universal Monster movie.
Yes.
Frankenstein in space.
Yeah.
That's right.
There we go.
Meet Dracula on Mars.
And the guy who's the astronaut who is heading the spaceship will be a guy named Larry Talbot, who has a tendency to change into something other than human, So we have Frankenstein, Dracula, and Larry Talbot.
We already had Jason in space. That's about enough monsters. That was it. That pretty much killed the idea.
Well, the funny thing is, you guys are joking about that. My understanding is that the new Indiana Jones movie, I don't know if they go into space, but it definitely has the space race. This is my understanding as the backdrop. So we're kidding around. We may be.
Well, that's the right time frame because they've already gone through the 50s and the whole nuclear thing.
Right. Exactly.
If we can have James Bond in space, we could have Indiana Jones in space.
Exactly. Well, we'll find out soon enough.
Yes.
Right.
Well, it's about time because, speaking of James Bond in space, Jaws and the one girl managed to stay behind on the space station. Right. And if it didn't crash, they're out there multiplying in space. What kind of kids are they having? That's your next movie right there.
I don't want to know, to be honest with you. I have no interest.
This could be it right there. I like this movie. Let's do it.
Oh, boy.
Jaws in space. Why not? You have Sharknado in space.
Well, Anthony, can we wrap this?
I think we need to.
Let's pull the cord.
I'll be talking about Booberry soon.
Julian, where can everyone find you?
I'm sorry?
Where can everyone find you?
Oh, well, juliandavidstone.com. That's my website.
Yeah. Julian David Stone. Well, thank you very much, Julian, for stopping by. And once again, it was an amazing story. Can't wait to hear about the space race. I have a few pages left of It's Alive. I want to finish it. I was conflicted. I'm already going to be talking about it. I've already read 95%. I'm going to go ahead and finish the rest of it because I want to see how it ends. Because I didn't live through that period and I refuse to go on Wiki and read about it. I want to read it through your eyes because your version is probably how that's how I'm going to relay it in real life. It's exactly how it happens right here. Julie, it's the whole thing. It's documented right here. See, perspective is reality.
So May 17th, the big release.
Yep.
Folks, get out and get this book. Get it on Kindle or
go to Barnes and Noble.
Barnes and Noble. Get it. Amazon. It is fun. If you love that genre as I do, it's fun. Do yourself a favor.
Hold on, Kevin. And Julian, isn't today someone's birthday that we were
Julian
talking
mentioned
about?
Yeah, it is. We're talking on the birthday of Junior Laemmle, one of the main characters
Wow.
in my book. This is his 114th birthday, and we would not
Happy
be
birthday.
having a conversation if it were not for the birth of Junior Laemmle, the one who wanted to make these movies. So
I wonder if he's in heaven right now looking for a pharmacy because he's having a bit of a chill.
I'll tell you one other really interesting thing that I did not discover until 5 days ago. I actually, this was another, we were talking about this earlier, this was another Facebook post I did 4 or 5 days ago. My entry into this world was, as a lot of people, was through the Aurora models. Like I built some of them before I'd actually seen the movies, just because back then you had to wait for them to come on TV. Well, the person, James Bama, who did the artwork on all those Aurora model kits, he just died 5 days ago. Okay, here's the crazy part. His birthday is also today.
Oh,
wow.
Him and Junior were born on the same day. And it's just interesting that and I didn't know that until he passed away 5 days ago.
And James Bama, his work is fabulous.
Yeah.
I used to have some of those Aurora kits.
Yeah, the person who first drew me into this world had the same birthday as the person responsible for making the movie. So kind of an interesting thing to discover just 5 days ago.
One of my proudest moments as a kid was completing finally the Wolfman Aurora model. I got it right. I had less of a good time with the Frankenstein one, but we don't talk about that.
Well, I always struggled with, I wanted to paint them, but I wanted the glow in the dark parts,
Right.
What do you do? Like you paint over the glow, so that was always, they were wonderful. I had a entire shelf of them as a kid.
Sure.
And before we wrap, Julie, let me go ahead and go around the circle with my host because we're all busy doing other things besides the podcast that are horror related. Al, what's going on with Creature Features this week?
Well, this week, we are doing some technical work, so you may notice a little change in how things look on the set. We are going to be at the West Coast Haunters Con in Portland, Oregon, 13th through 15th.
Man, you get around.
Yeah. Well, I'll be the guest DJ and one of their special guests there.
Nice.
And guest MC for the Sunday Night Monster movies. And I'll be on the March 13th floor of the hotel, which is the party floor. So I highly look forward to that.
Excellent.
So, and of course, we have Fanime coming up, which I will be out there doing some interviews. So if you see me, if you're at Fanime, you might see me. Heck, you might see me at Monsterpalooza. We haven't talked about that much. And one of the movies I worked on, Talk to the Gun, is coming out for a limited premiere June 18th, I think it is. And so I am looking forward to seeing that. And of course, I will be down at San Diego Comic-Con in July. So that's what's coming up so far with me.
And all of this will be in the show notes. So just go down to the bottom. And if you want to go follow Al and his Gulliver Travels, please do so.
Yep.
Joe, what you got working?
Oh, well, we're talking about the upcoming guest list of Monsterpalooza. Also talking about our latest theater that's going to be dropping tomorrow with Michael Rooker. And talking about hopefully some really fun little horror films. And of course, if you want me to watch the nice little sci-fi film, Moonfall or Moon Knight, one of those.
One was horrible. The other one is getting really good reviews.
Okay, yeah. So whichever one you guys pick, choose. Make sure it's fun though, because I don't want to end up losing any more brain cells.
Kevin, what you got going on?
I have interview questions that I have to get off for Joe Bob Briggs. That's going to by May 1st. That's going to be featured in the Scary Monsters fall issue, the cover. They're doing one on horror hosts, and I'll be doing one on him. And then I have an interview also by email with Joyce Meadows, the female star of Brain from Planet Eris. So there's a lot, and there's going to be. I'll be joining you guys hopefully at Monsterpalooza.
Absolutely,
and,
we'll be there.
We're going to be having some fun, and of course I have my interviewing gig at Creatures Con in August. That'll be fun. It's always fun to do one of those on-stage QAs after you watch the film, because you kind of get the audience reaction about the film, and then you get to talk with one of the stars of it. And in this case, it's Spider Baby, followed by a talk with Beverly Washburn. So that'll be fun. So there's a lot of stuff that's going on.
Very, very, very cool. And I'll wrap it with a quick nod to tomorrow afternoon. We release our show. We had Michael Rooker on. Thank you, Tubi, again for allowing us the opportunity to interview the star. It was for Corrective Measures, and that will be premiering tomorrow on the Grim and Bloody Theater. And Death Parade Film Festival is in full swing. So if you are a filmmaker, or maybe a visual artist or a music director, or you just create something horror that might fit in the realm of a film festival, go to deathparadefilmfest.com, click on the 2022 Film Festival, or you can go to Film Freeway, Death Parade Film Fest, and go ahead and submit, because right now we have 30% off during April Ween special promotion going on. So look forward to seeing your work, and look forward to screening your work this fall. Once again, thank you very much, Julian, for allowing us to read your novel, premiering May 17th. This was, in fact, our first time reading a novel in advance to bring it on an author, so it was an absolute pleasure. It was a wonderful experience, and we hope to do it again.
Yeah, thanks for having me on. It's been a blast talking with you guys. A lot of fun.
All right. So for Joe, Kevin, Al, Julian, and myself, that's our episode. Enjoy horror, guys.
Good night.
Bye.
Have a good night.
Thank you, Julian.
Oh, my
And
pleasure.
of course, watch horror films. Keep America strong.
Yes.
That's right.
That's
Keep
right.
it strong.
Absolutely.
Night, guys.
Night.